you do want to come and join us, feel free at any point. Our host for today is Gemma Milne, and she is going to introduce Alice. And Bea, would you put your hands together for the two of them for Collapse Feminism? Welcome them to the stage, Alice and Gemma.
Hello everybody, welcome. What a venue this is, absolutely amazing. I was just admiring, my dad's a stonemason, so I was admiring the stonework at the back before we came on stage. Thank you so much for coming and joining us on this chilly Edinburgh Sunday. Yes, come sit down, everyone who's not had their seat yet, come. There's plenty of seats, even down the front here for all those who are feeling bold. My name's Gemma, and I'm going to be hosting a conversation with Alice here, which I'm really excited about after reading her wonderful book, Collapse Feminism, which comes out on Tuesday officially in the UK. So if you're able to get yourself a wee copy at the back on your way out, you'll be earlier than everyone else. Yeah. You'll be so on trend. So I highly recommend you pick up one on the way out. I'm a researcher and writer. I focus on science, technology, and the impacts on society, and I'm particularly interested in kind of how social issues effervesce through the world of tech and science, and obviously in this case a little bit more about the digital. But enough from me. I want to hear more from you, Alice, and obviously everyone has come here to hear about you. Before we begin diving into the book, could you give everyone a little bit of context as to who you are and perhaps how you arrived at writing a book like this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for coming, everyone. So my name is Cappelle. I'm a video essayist, content creator, influencer, some will say. I've been making videos on YouTube, critical video essays, for 3 years now. Actually, today, 3 years today. Basically what I do is that I make 10, 15, 20 minutes video essays on topics related to the news, related to internet culture, and the idea is to kind of, talk about things related to sociology, philosophy, but twist it in a way that makes it accessible and also entertaining, because, you don't want to do like a full-on 1-hour philosophy lecture because they, can be a bit boring. But the idea is to make humanities cool, to keep learning and using all those trends on social media to do that.
So tell us a little bit about how you arrived at writing Collapse Feminism.
Yeah, basically like Repeater, who published the book, they slid in my DMs and they asked me if I wanted to write a book. And I was like, yeah, I do. And then I was like, what am I actually going to write about? And obviously, like, I took inspiration from my work on social media. So this is very much focused on internet culture, subcultures. Because I do a lot of politics as well, it's mostly about like how conservative ideas kind of spread in those subcultures, not necessarily in political communities, but also in apolitical communities, in more lifestyle communities as well. So that's the idea behind the book. But I did not only want to criticize or to point a finger at the enemy. I also wanted to sort of provide some alternatives or ideas or paths, just ways of thinking of how we can change the situation that is, right now, how we can like fight against those ideas, conservative ideas, and that's the book.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So it's called Collapse Feminism, and I enjoy all these, we get so many books with different forms of feminism or different forms of capitalism and so on and so forth, but Collapse Feminism was a new one for me. So perhaps for everyone here in the audience too. So tell us a little bit about what are you talking about when you talk about collapse, and how does that kind of signify the current moment that we're in?
It's a bit clickbait, isn't it? Like on the internet we say that, we say things that are a little bit clickbait when it's like, oh yeah, interesting concept. So I'm not gonna lie, I tried to find something that is kind of like, but basically the idea was to take a look at what is being produced in terms of essays, feminism, etc. And just, it was this realization that the way we talk about the future is very, kind of depressing, to be honest. We struggle to imagine positive alternatives or just imagine alternatives. And I start this book with this realization that the phrase "we're doomed" is becoming more and more common. And it's true that most people say it with, a bit of irony or like, with humor, but deep down, like it means something. When you look at how people, what they see the future looking like, it's very depressing. So the idea was to kind of accept that it's fair to feel like that, but also to, bring a little bit of optimism, because I feel like the rhetoric of loss, of, all of that is too often used by the powerful. So people who, can afford to think about, oh my gosh, the future is not going to be bright, etc. But like when you think of minorities, for example, they cannot afford to, they have to believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And I kind of wanted to take that as a source of inspiration to, keep it as positive and optimistic as possible. So yeah.
There's a real history of this idea of, I guess, imagination activism or thinking about futures in different kind of ways, particularly in the left. I mean, going back to Arendt, for instance, talking about post-war and saying, if we can't imagine the future, sort of, what's the point? That's a huge paraphrase, but you know what I'm saying. So this idea of, I guess, imagination versus collapse is really compelling. But what I think is really interesting about how you attack it in the book is you're also talking about things through the lens of what does well online.
Yeah.
And what does well online is doomerism, is collapse, is this idea of, you talk about the outrage aesthetic that does actually effervesce. So what does it mean to you to think about things, understanding the role of collapse and understanding why that resonates for people, but pushing back against that, particularly as you are a content creator yourself and an activist?
No, it's true. And it's like, I feel like it's still important to explain how it works. And so there's a big section in the book, like just explaining how the online world works. You mentioned the outrage aesthetic, which is very much this idea of you have to have the clickbait title, you have to have like a very scary thumbnail, you have to, you have to appeal to people's emotion, and most of the time it will be fair. And to be fair, like even on the left, like we tend to play with that as well. I'm not gonna lie, like I also, play a little bit with that, and we called it the attention economy, and you kind of have to play the game if you wanna, get noticed. So the whole point is like, how do we use it in a way that is, in alignment with our values? I guess like for me, being left-wing means also like prioritizing education, critical thinking, all those things that unfortunately, with the attention economy, with this outrage aesthetic, aren't really pushed forward. You get a lot of this person thinks this and this person thinks that, and then you have like a bunch of likes and comments. It's like, oh yeah, that must be right. Like so many people are liking this, but and I guess like as leftists, it's a bit of a challenge. And I mean, we've talked about it, but I'm not sure I have like all the answers, and it would be great to hear about what you think, guys, as well. But I think it's crucial for us to kind of understand how it works, use it to some degree, but also question it and maybe go beyond that. So that's why, like, collapse feminism, like this is just more like okay, this is what is going on right now. Like this is the sort of thing we're working with and think that get attention, but like how do we go beyond that?
So, not to give away spoilers, because, if you don't know what's in the book, you should read it, of course. But the book, I think, is wonderfully segmented into, I guess, sections or parts that can roughly be summarized by work, family, the internet, and then broad society, right? So I wonder if, without giving the game away, not that that's really normally a thing with nonfiction, but anyway, if you could briefly summarize what collapse means in these four areas and how you kind of characterize this idea of how feminism is sort of centered or decentered within these areas. So yeah, start with, I can remind you of them if you've forgotten, but work first.
Okay, that's a inch section. Well, to be fair, like, I guess for me, collapse is very much associated with stagnation, with fear, with turning on ourselves. So for me, it's very much associated with conservatism. So when I say collapse feminism, it's also the rise of conservative forms of feminism. And I have a whole section about like traditional femininity making a comeback. It's taking many, many different shapes on social media, but it is something that and what I really find interesting, and that's a common pattern of the book, like throughout the book, is that of course, they are the very like extreme, outrageous forms. So like I talk about the trad wives, but like, so just to give a little bit of context, like trad wives are those female influencers who want to go back. I mean, they live as if they were like housewives from the 1950s. They dress in a certain way. They want to submit to their husband and, be the good housewife. This is rather extreme. And when you really think about it, like not too many women are gonna adopt this lifestyle. But what's really interesting to me is how do we get there? Like how even like in liberal spheres, for example, some women, some feminists will adopt a certain language that if you go one step further, like you progressively move towards that. So the goal was not only to talk about what is outrageous, what is the very much like conservative, far-right conservative, etc., but also to talk about the more liberal, let's say, liberal side of it, and like how, you know, it kind of disseminates through those spheres as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we see this a lot. I mean, I've thought about it before through that you talk about the lean in era and whatnot. And I think what you're saying about how we get there, perhaps, I don't want to say mistakenly, but because I feel like that's kind of letting people off the hook, but there is a sense of mistakenness where movements that are meant to be empowering towards women reach a sort of crescendo where we sort of realize, or we, you know, we realize it's actually not quite so empowering, and then you have to kind of build off the back of that, and then you realize that that one also isn't empowering. And so I'm wondering, is that the same throughout all these different eras? Do you kind of see that, particularly with, you know, thinking about the internet as a whole? How does that sense of, I guess, driving of an idea and backing it to then critique, is that something you just see over and over again, or can you think we can ever get out of that?
You mean like, for example, like something that we see as empowering and then realizing that
like,
it's not...
I mean, think about like girl power, Spice
the girl
Girls,
boss,
for anyone.
like
I mean,
that.
I'm a bit older than you, but Spice Girls was very, flower power, like obviously before me, but girl power was Spice Girls, and then it was Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg, and you see what I mean? And it's those things, you kind of felt like you were riding the wave, thinking that that was the right way to go.
No,
right?
yeah, I totally see what you mean. Yeah, the figure of the girl boss is such a good example for that, because it has evolved through time like so much. And you know, a lot of people say now like the girl boss, so this idea of like the woman who prioritizes her career, she gives everything, she works so much, and like she's so powerful, she has a lot of money, etc. So it's just like hustle culture, which is another term. I feel like I have to, I give a lot of definitions in the book as well, so like just to make sure it's also about like educating people on like what internet culture is. But yeah, this idea of like power, women in power, women in leadership. Yeah, we need more women in powerful positions. Well, do we really? And I feel like now that representation is getting better for women, for example, we're starting to see the limits of that. And I guess that's why you have this sort of, yeah, that wasn't maybe not as great as we thought it was. We now need to criticize it, but we're going to come up with something different. And so in the book, for example, I make this this argument that the girl boss is dead. We've criticized her a lot, but we have this new sort of soft girl boss, that girl, which is another like online community stereotype, let's say, which is very much more focused on well-being, taking care of yourself, etc. But the goal is still the same. The goal is to build your personal brand, to develop your career, to remain feminine. So it's always the same thing. It's just rebranded as something different. And that's something that capitalism, neoliberalism, to be more specific, is very, very good at. It's very, very good at like rebranding things, absorbing all the criticism that we're gonna address to this or that trend or this or that phenomenon, and then just like providing a new version that is like updated to people's expectations, really. So yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the so what, you know, and I think you do a brilliant job of describing these, these feminist ideas that have been, you know, you reference many amazing feminist thinkers throughout history, but putting them in the context of current internet culture and explaining them in different ways, I think you do a great job of. There's something then about, okay, what does it look like in terms of subverting, changing, moving past this trend of new thing, no, that doesn't work, new thing, it doesn't work, that has the same thing at the core. And you talk a lot about, communal love, for instance, is a lovely phrase. You talk a lot about, big tech being, not being privatized anymore. So there are ideas there that kind of try to go past this, but what do you see as a kind of central thing that has to change?
First of all, like bringing class back into the conversation, and more people are doing it, because like I feel like class was kind of removed from the equation, because we had this sort of, a lot of feminist thinkers who were Marxist or even anarchists, had maybe not as much anarchists, but let's say more the socialists, the Marxists, still had a view of women that was kind of not very liberating. It's like the mother is still expected to have children, she's empowered, she can work too, but there was still like those expectations and this sort of essentialism as well as to what a woman is supposed to be and what is her duty in society. Make babies, for example, for the revolution or whatever it would be. Like you still had those things. So I feel like maybe the fact that women sort of craved their own independence paved the way for this sort of neoliberal reappropriation of feminism. And now I guess we're at the stage where we can maybe reintroduce class in the conversation, but from a perspective that does not essentialize women and put them back in their role. Or so maybe that would be like a path to develop. And to be fair, like I talk a lot about my colleagues, as I call them, like all the video essayists, and there are more and more conversations on those topics. I feel like class is slowly being reintroduced in our feminist discussions. But I'm looking forward to seeing how it's gonna evolve. But yeah.
Kind of building on that a little bit, because I love that as I was reading the book, you cite the video essays quite a lot. You don't tend to see that in non-fiction books, citing of YouTubers, which I honestly thought was brilliant. And there's actually a great list at the end in the acknowledgements.
Yeah,
that
had to make sure I did not forget anyone, because otherwise I would get messages from.
Well, no, it's a great list. There's a few in there that I recognised and love myself, and then a whole load that I'm going to go home and watch all the videos. But I thought it was a wonderful way of looking at how do ideas kind of spread, and how do we think about what it means to critique and what it means to fight back against ideas, right? Because you're talking about this sort of central change in the way that we think about women, which for me seems like a very bottom-up approach, right? Which of course a lot of leftist politics does start with this idea of, we have to be able to change the masses and organize and so on and so forth. But there's also a sense here with utilizing platform, right? And utilizing, I guess, the tools of the oppression. I mean, you talk a lot about the very fact of the business model of the internet is why we have these conservative ideas flourishing, right? So I guess it's this age-old question of, do you use the master's tools or not? And if so, what does it mean to use them in a way that is radical and doesn't just, keep giving us these waves?
It is kind of challenging because, I'm somehow participating in that system because I make videos. I have sponsorships every now and then on my videos. So technically, I'm doing the thing that I'm criticizing. But one thing that I found super interesting about social media or content creation in general is that even if it's a platform, a capitalist platform, etc., I feel like there is a wider diversity of voices in comparison to academia, which is still, kind of elitist. It's changing progressively, but still. And I've learned because obviously I'm a content creator, but I'm also a viewer, and I've learned so much that I would have never learned in academia. I had some classes because I did humanities, and I did 2 years on African American studies. All my teachers were white, and we were being told about African American history, and it's just it does not make sense. And I think the first time I actually it was on YouTube, the first time I actually watched a video or learned about the African American experience by an African American person, and it changed so much. It's hard to explain, but it's just the way it is told, the fact that they can add their own personal experience, which is also something I try to include in the book, and to break down this sort of elitism that you often find in academia, and seek inspiration among my colleagues, among my what is done on the internet. And again, it's important to state it as well that not everybody can make videos on the internet. You need the equipment, you need some free time. It was very interesting to me to see how a lot of people that you see online, content creators, we have this idea of yeah, you can just take your phone, if you have Wi-Fi, that's it, you can make your channel and it's gonna be successful and blah, blah, blah. But the more I talk to content creators, etc., the more I realize that a lot of them also do come from the same, background as people in academia. It's just, so there is some, it's still elitist in some way, but I feel like there is that extra diversity, younger people, younger voices, sorry, and also, what was I gonna say, younger voices, and yeah, I guess the way the language we use as well is different, and that sort of personal experience that we don't have as much in academia.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Being an academic, I can
yeah.
attest to that.
That's why I'm looking at you being like, can you confirm what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
no. I mean, academia is wonderful in
Yeah,
some
yeah.
ways and so terribly bad in so many. But I want to build a little bit on this idea of, I guess, using the internet for a sense of, because this is what you're talking about is a real sort of shift in, not just how people think about women, but how women think about their own experience, about ideas of family, sex, gender. There's a lot you cover in here. And again, going back to the age-old Mark Fisher citing Jameson, it's easier to imagine the end of the world and the end of capitalism. It's difficult to think of things in different ways. It's hard to be radicalized, but in a good way. In some ways, as we touch on in many books about internet culture and in yours too, it's in some ways easy to become radicalized in the wrong way, in the more conservative way, and you touch a lot on that. Is it about countering that? Is it about doing it a different way, or is it about trying to encourage people not to go down those holes in the first place, or not to use the internet in the first place? Do you see what I mean?
No, and like it's been a frustration of mine as well, because like when you are part of this economy, like the attention economy, you have to play with it. But one thing I tell myself when I feel like depressed and like, oh no, we need to change the entire system, and what this video about that girl is gonna change to it. But it's about like filling a gap. And the way I see it is, so many people are gonna be interested in this or that internet culture. Now, what can I do to use that sort of trend, use that momentum to spread my ideas, not conservative ideas, but progressive ideas? How can I use that momentum? And then maybe someone else is gonna bring something different, a bit more, a bit more in depth. But like maybe I created that path. I counted the pipeline. That's a term that we use a lot as well, like the pipeline, meaning that this sort of, you watch one video and then you recommended another video that is go deeper and deeper into a topic, and that's how you get that sort of radicalization. How can I counter that and use what is trendy, use what people want to see, and provide a different way of seeing it? So a lot of my content is actually focused on things that that's something I love to do. It's like take something that is clearly not political, slow living, that girl, all those trends, and be like, hey, maybe it is political, but you didn't realize it. And then, bring some sociology, bring some philosophy, bring some left-wing ideas, and see where people, I do receive a lot of messages of people being like, oh yeah, I never like thought about it this way, or oh, I started reading this book after you talked about this video, and it was my first time reading like sociology or philosophy, or like discovering this or that thinker, and I'm like, yes, I did my job. And then someone else is gonna maybe provide something different, but I like to see it as like a sort of little network where we each contribute and like create this sort of positive, progressive pipeline, let's say.
Yeah, there was something you mentioned in the book that I thought was interesting. Jumping on this idea of like unions are cool, right? There's like join a girl union, or in the girl world, or whatever you were citing, Eve Livingston. But I thought that was interesting around targeting this idea of, at the end of the day, people are trying to look for some sense of belonging, some sense of community, something they can identify with. And unfortunately, we have that tendency. Unfortunate part of it is it does mean that a lot of the conservative ideas that you're talking about, it's because they create this real sense of community, this sense of belonging, that gives people who are searching for something somewhere to land. Do you think that's something we do enough on the left, and particularly with respect to women and feminist ideas?
No, that's a good question. It's a topic that comes back pretty often in conversation with friends, with people in general. Like, how do we create those spaces where we build this sort of community, where we exchange those ideas? I have like a Discord chat. I created it a few years ago now, and it's one of those places where I'm like, oh, this is great. Like we keep on sharing information, educating each other, checking each other as well. And it's not just, like I started it, I called it the think tank. But I started it as like, no, it's gonna be very serious. It's all about like education and everything. And then progressively people said, hey, like, why don't you create like a channel for, I don't know, memes, or a channel for sharing like, I don't know, like music, films and stuff like that. And initially I was like, no, my content is serious. I want the Discord chat to be serious. But then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, oh yeah, actually people crave that, they want to they want to make friendships. They want to exchange with other people on things that aren't necessarily that serious. So I think that that's something we can try to be better at, you know, like not just do like the very serious, like we're gonna have philosophical discussions on like this book or like this or that. It's like also like doing very casual things as well. So I don't know, maybe that's something that we can work on. Another thing as well that I touch on a little bit in the book is like also promoting our own aesthetics, our own like imaginary world, our own cultures, subcultures. So that's something we can do too. But again, like I feel like before we reach that point, we first need to get the attention of people and want to make sure that people want to be engaged in those things. Otherwise, it's just going to be people who are already convinced, and you know, we don't want to have like the sort of like echo chamber where it's like and then the language is changed. But like, you know, it's a whole other topic that I touch on a little bit in the book as well. But the language we use as well is important. So yeah, lots of things to think about really. But yeah.
I'm going to ask one more question and then we're going to go to audience, because I was sitting in the last session and the audience was super engaged, so I want to give you loads of time to ask all of your questions of Alice and on these topics. So get ready. This is your last question warning, I guess. I think I'm quite a pragmatist. I think I follow that philosophy more so than others. And maybe I'm just impatient, but I have a sense of, okay, what do we do? What's the step I can take after I'm convinced? I was convinced after the first few pages. And to be fair, given this audience has showed up to the Radical Book Fair hosted by Lighthouse Books, I can imagine you're probably preaching to the converted, at least the choir anyway, to a degree. So what's your ask, or what's your hope in terms of what people do, or how they can take action, and at various scales, right? Because you know, as you said, not one video from one person isn't going to necessarily change the world, but we can take personal actions. When it comes to changing the world's imagination about the role of the women, it's quite a big ask. Perhaps you could give us some different asks or do's at different scales.
Yeah, it's when I do videos, like it's often a comment I get. It's like, I like you talk about those very abstract ideas, etc. But do you have any solutions? Like, what can we do now? And I guess again, like to connect with what we said earlier, like this idea of a network of like people providing different things. I guess some will be more pragmatic in their approach and will connect to. So, but I really enjoy doing like sort of collaborations with people who are more on like the pragmatic side, whereas I'm more on like the ideas, like the philosophy side, I would say. But like it's very common. Like I'll receive a message. For example, I did a video. I feel like I'm talking more about the videos than the book. But, you know, but it was like a video on the fashion, like, and how we can imagine the future of fashion. And one of the ideas was the library economy, which is a super cool concept. I love it. It's the idea of like we borrow everything, we give back, we take care of it. So it's a whole like a very different philosophy. And then I received a message from someone saying, I actually did that in the town I live in. And I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. And you know, like, I guess I wouldn't spend too much time on like in terms of like what I write and my work. I don't spend too much time on like the more like very pragmatic solutions, because I expect that people who are gonna read, watch, will figure it out by themselves. And I don't want to give like specific guidelines of like, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, but just let people, like, whether it's art, whether it's like you know, organizing like community events, or whether it's like you know, working with representatives. It's just, it takes so many different forms. And I feel like maybe it's not as much my job, it could be, but it's people's job to kind of fulfill that sort of need, you know.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, let's turn to our esteemed audience here. It's quite bright, so put your hands up and wave at me, or at Mary. Actually, it's not Mary, but so I'm saying I can't really see. It's so nice and bright. Please raise your hand. Yes, we've got a question here at the front. Just wait for the mic so we can make sure everyone can hear. I know there's also people online. Hello, online. I'm told that if you write a question, someone will relay that to me. Is that you? Okay, great. So yeah, please ask.
Hello, is it weird if I stand like this? Can people still see? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. Hiya. So first of all, thank you for taking all your time to come and talk, and it's been fantastic to listen to you both philosophize and think about these things. I have two questions, but I'm happy to just ask one. I'll save the second if there's a lull in conversation. I guess my first question is, what do you make of the theory that the internet cannot be free forever? The idea that all the server space, all the services, all the censoring and censoring teams, modding teams, it's labor and it's costly. And the way that models of payment for services like Twitter / X or whatever, or Tumblr or other social medias has been rolled out has had a lot of pushback. So I guess I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
one thing that I kept coming back was the, this idea of like a peer-to-peer collaboration, which has been the start of the internet. Like that's how it was born, peer-to-peer collaboration, and it kind of, once again, got co-opted by the sort of neoliberalism, capitalism, where it's now you like something, you comment, basically you're helping the platform, you're giving that, you are doing the work for them. So like, how can we reappropriate that? I use the example of Wikipedia, which is not very sexy as an example, because, but there are so many ways, like things we can do with that, like sort of take that peer-to-peer collaboration, expand on that, what would it mean? There's this concept of the digital garden, which I really like, I didn't talk about it in the book, where it's like you build your own sort of Wikipedia, you build your own like little garden with ideas and articles you find, etc., and like people can contribute. And this is a sort of philosophy like I'm into when it comes to the future of the internet and how we can like build a freer, more educational type of internet. But yeah, tricky question. But you know what? Like I've been thinking quite a lot about it lately, and maybe it will be like a future. Who knows? Maybe future work. We'll see. So, but yeah.
And maybe I'll add something just as well, because
Yeah.
it's a part of my research too, is free doesn't mean uncompensated labor, right? It's who's paying and who's profiting off of it, right? So there are models for the internet that don't have to be driven by high growth capitalistic nature, right? Particularly when we talk about public models or publicly owned, or data commons, for instance, is a interesting. There's a lot of interesting work being done in that space. Cooperatively owned organizations and so on and so forth. If you want to read more on that, I'd highly recommend Logic magazine. They have a thing called Logic School, I think it's called, and they're really interested in working with people in technology who are creating different models for how technology can be owned and built and so on and so forth. It doesn't feed into that sort of growth at all cost capitalist kind of nature. But to also go back to your point about the birth of the internet, yes, it was peer-to-peer, but it was also funded by the military. So we have to reckon with that when we're talking about these things, that they sort of didn't just appear out of nowhere through the goodwill of people. There's other funding mechanisms, so it's a bigger problem than, I mean, it's a good question for that reason. Who's next? Or you can always ask your second question as well. Yes, come over here and ask, please do.
Hi, I was wondering, it's kind of a jumble of thoughts, but I was wondering a little bit about like Taylor Swift, and like she's incredibly famous, but like the relationship between her music, the romanticization of life, I guess, and like the girl identity as a whole, whether that be in relation to romantic relationships or like scrolling through Pinterest. I'm just wondering what you make of that, especially with internet culture and the development of one's own identity when looking at a girl boss like Taylor Swift.
Yeah. Gosh,
Love that.
I'm gonna get so much hate. No, I'm joking. It's like there are a few rules on the internet. Don't share your opinion on Taylor Swift. Don't. I'm joking. It's an interesting case study, actually, Taylor Swift, because she's been hated so much for talking a lot about like breakups and boys being like bad and like reclaiming this sort of I'm single and it's okay and I'll date this guy and then this guy and blah blah. So I guess that's an interesting aspect, but it's so true. And I start the book with that, this idea of people kind of projecting themselves or building their own identities around those internet communities or those celebrities, etc. And like this concept of like weak egos, meaning that we can switch from like one aesthetic to the next. So one day I'm going to be like a dark academia, which is very much like on brand with this.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So, you know, this idea of like dressing like an academic and etc. And then the next day I'm going to be an e-girl, and then the following day I'm going to be this and that. And like, why do we change like so fast, so quickly? Why do we need to recreate identities like all the time? And how does it connect to, you know, like our economic system and the design, like the fact that consumption is very much encouraged? And so this idea of how like identity is connected to consumption. So yeah, lots of good ideas, but Taylor Swift is a good example of that because of how fans, for example, will like put their body and soul into it and like just, you know, like buy everything that she releases and or everything the boyfriend of Taylor Swift wear or stuff like that. But yeah.
I think there's also something to be said that you mentioned. I can never pronounce her surname. Emily. She wrote My Body.
Ratajkowski. I was told it's
know who I'm
not
talking about.
Ratajkowski actually. Yeah.
Oh, I'm
it's a different
terribly
pronunciation,
sorry
but
for
yeah.
anyone who knows. But what I found really interesting about when that, first of all, her article came out and then she wrote the book, right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, the commentary from all different sides on that. And from women talking about the positives of it, the negatives of it, the hypocrisy of it, and you know, the more you sort of read, you would read something being like, this is great, and then you would read something saying, no, it's not great. Then you'd read something going, if you think it's great, you're part of the problem. Then you'd read something going, if you think it's bad, you're part of the problem. And then if you think like a critic, you're part of the, and it was this sort of like iterative, and in some sense that's like, oh, but in another sense, is that not part of it, right? There's no right answer. And talking about something like Taylor Swift, I should say, I think Taylor Swift, she's a person.
Brand.
Well, I mean, right. And, you know, you can look at her through a fan studies lens. You can look at her through a feminism lens. You can look at her through a economic lens. And I think it's the wrestling with those examples that allow us to have the thought that's meant to counter these imaginaries, right? As opposed to trying to take a stand and have an opinion, as you say, on
I know, true.
on
And
Taylor Swift.
that's something that's really interesting also about the internet is the way that people are incentivized to pick their own angle.
Right.
And so you'll have like one topic that is covered like through so many different angles, and everybody will bring something either personal or something they read. Oh, it made me think of this and that. And so yeah, again, like, but it would be great to find a way to kind of connect all those things, create a network, because at the moment it's like very, you know, it's all over the internet, but it's like it's not. It would be great. Like that's something that the internet world, especially the analysis side of it, is missing. It's this sort of what you have in academia when you have like seminars and where everything like, you know, you get to chat about like it would be great to have like sort of a seminar on Taylor Swift. That would be amazing. I don't know, you say like, things like that, just to share our different angles and maybe go beyond that. And it's starting to happen. Like we can see that there are. And that's why I've talked about a lot of video essayists in this book, because I'm trying to connect the different things they said in this video, that video, and how like all of that kind of, you know, like it creates a conversation, and some aspects make things move forward, you know, but like very important conversations moving forward, really.
Love it. Any other questions from the, yes, lady here, come forward and ask your question. Thank you.
Hello, hi.
Oh, love a lady with a notebook.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I have a notebook. I took notes. I was wondering, kind of jumping off from Taylor Swift and what you were saying about about kind of the radicalization online, so conservative radicalization. I was wondering what your thoughts were on kind of the connection between popular feminism online and popular misogyny online, because I've been reading quite a lot about that, and yeah, I was wondering what your thoughts were.
Yeah,
Lovely question.
Yeah, super interesting. In both cases, I feel like it's very much, it can very easily get depoliticized, because even if it's misogyny and that is political in itself, it's like, it's something I always wonder when I see like so there's this thing like called the manosphere, which is like a bunch of groups of men that bond over their hate of women, basically. And like sometimes they say things that are so outrageous. It's like, do they even believe what they say, or do they just say it because it's like it's gonna bring like views and likes and things like that? And I guess it would be the same, kind of the same with pop feminism. It's like, yeah, this thing is clickbait. It gets attention, so I'm gonna use like all the vocabulary that they use, but like remove all the politics that go with it. So it's just like outrage, outrage, outrage. But the thing is that you don't really know like how people who are watching this content, like how they're going to receive it. Are they going to take it seriously, or is it just like, yeah, something they watch for entertainment? And I think like maybe that's one rather big weakness, a big problem of the internet is this sort of, everything is entertainment. Nothing is really serious. So it's like, how do you bring back serious conversations on there? And that's a problem we also have like on the left, because like, and that's something I talk about in the book as well, we react a lot to what conservatives do. They run the game. They know how to play with the algorithm. They will make like a YouTube video that turns into a reel, that turns into a TikTok video, that turns into whatever. They know how to do it. We're not as good at it, to be honest, on the left. And so what we tend to do is that we react a lot to what they do. But when you react to something, you kind of legitimize. It's not that you legitimize the thing, but it's like you legitimize the strategy they use. And they win at it. So it's like, it's always like but you can connect that to what we see in like politics as well, like just electoral politics. I feel like the left is kind of losing in a way because we really struggle to talk about the topics we want to talk about. So we always have to react to, you know, they love conservatives or just like even, you know, like mainstream media love to put forward the trans issue, the, you know, identity politics, because they know that left-wing people really struggle to get something across that won't fall into like the sort of cultural war. And it's not to say that those topics are like not legitimate, they definitely are. But again, it's always like adapting to the conservative discourse, adapting to their strategies and reacting to it instead of like being proactive and like creating our own ways of communicating, our own forms of entertainment. And again, I don't have like all the answers. It would be interesting to investigate that, but how can we, you know, like be proactive and not just reactive?
There's something as well about your question around this idea of impact versus intent as well. And again, go back to my little pragmatist mind. Perhaps I'm less interested in the intent and more interested in the impact. And when you're talking about popular feminism versus popular misogyny, arguably, and you kind of make this argument in the book, arguably the impact is the same, right? There's a sense of, with popular misogyny, there's a deliberate, intentional reduction of values and rights of women, whereas popular feminism, done in the sort of girl boss, lean-in way, unintentionally cements certain ideas which ultimately have the impact of right? So maybe it depends where you lie on whether you think intent is enough or not. And I think that's why these kind of new materialist analysis of these things are so important, because they let us see the impact that sometimes we don't necessarily realize we're having. At least that's my thoughts on how we can justify our jobs as academics doing political economies of whatever, you know, because we're showing the impact. But that at least is how I think about it anyway. Yes, lovely. Please come to the front and ask us your question, my friend.
Hey, thank you so much. It's been brilliant.
Closer to your mouth so we can hear you.
Sorry, thank you so
the
much.
mic.
Oh, right. One thing I want to say is how we can get kind of younger guys more involved in feminism, because I mean, a lot of the things I'm doing for Advanced Hire especially is you kind of see this this horde of young angry men that is spoken to by the right, and Tate I didn't want to bring up, but you know, and kind of this kind of idea the left speaks at men, like don't do this, like stop being misogynists. The right speaks to men and says, here's how we can like fight the feminists, like whatever fake like outrage they've created. But you know, how do we, I suppose, not like steal the men back, but lead them in the right direction? Because like you see a lot of these videos and it's like, oh, you know, like this is how much, like they're so close to being correct, and they say like, here are the problems of the world, here are the problems of the world, and actually it's feminism. No, it's like, no, it's neoliberalism, and actually class solidarity and things. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, do we have any like sound bites or almost like real solutions and focus on more like loud, angry stuff? I don't know if that's helpful, but that kind of speaks to young guys, and try and reduce hate marches and things and violence. Sorry.
No, that's lovely.
No,
How do
yeah.
we steal men? Let's go.
And again, like I think there's no one right answer to this question, and you will have like the pragmatic answer, you will have the more like philosophical answer. I guess the pragmatic, I talk about that in the book as well. I guess the pragmatic answer is the role model aspect. how do you forge your masculinity, and like who do you look up to as a man to, you know, to become a man yourself. But I have a little bit of an issue with that because, again, like it very much centers around masculinity, being a man. So this vision of gender, like you can only forge yourself through this perspective of gender. And I feel like it's such a shame, whether it's on the, you know, women's side or men's side. It's like, let's get rid of this idea that we can only forge ourselves through gender expression, through gender, really. And like, how can we go beyond that? So for me, like, I remember when I grew up, like I had various role models, and they were not just women, you know, they were men, they were, I mean, when I was young, like not too many people were openly queer, and not that I'm old, but yeah. But anyway, so how do we encourage men as well to develop role models that are not just men? You know, look up to this wonderful woman for not just for her gender expression, but just for what she does and what she stands for. You know, so I guess for me, that's when I get asked this question, that's where I go. But again, like I talk about it with a lot of friends. I have a friend of mine who's an activist, and he is really into this. Like, how do we bring back men to more positive values? And he's very much onto this idea of role models. How do we try to convince the guys who are in influential spheres? So, oh gosh, I always forget the name of the, you know, with that fight, but I can't remember. It's just like I can't remember the letters used for not MMA, but anyway. And like trying to bring those guys and like, hey, you can be like a positive role model, and you know, you influence so many people. And even on the left, like we do have some guys who would embody like role models. So yeah, I guess that would be like the more pragmatic path. But again, like for me, it's very much about going beyond gender as like as a mean to, you know, to forge your identity, really.
Wonderful. Thank you for the question. And yes, please come. And I saw another hand there. You can go next.
I feel like the internet's been quite like an oppressive place recently, especially with a lot of the content sort of being quite reactive. So I know that I feel a bit exhausted by a lot of responses to like Andrew Tate and like manosphere stuff. Do you have any suggestions for like how somebody can be proactive in sort of countering doomerism?
It's a tricky question because like when you want to adopt this position, you're gonna be ostracized because like you don't work with the system. So it's like, no, you're gonna be more. So I guess like in those cases, it's our job to also like, you know, as I said earlier, kind of create that connection between those people who are more marginalized because the idea they present are not like mainstream. I can even give some recommendations, and I have, like as you said, there's a list at the end of the book of like people who do an effort. I'll recommend like one person, like Andreism. Maybe some of you. It's a great channel and a YouTube channel. It's someone who really cares about providing a path forward, being proactive. Not like, and he often criticizes us actually for like reacting maybe a bit too much, because I also do that, like of course. So yeah, he would be a good example of that. I've been contacted by some men's movement. I'm always skeptical when they reach out, because like, oh, are you one of those like men's movement who like say that women are the problem or blah blah blah. But there are some who are really doing an effort at like providing something different, and not just, you know, like expand beyond, as I was saying, like the sort of gender approach, very gendered approach of like how you build yourself, your identity. But it is difficult, and yeah, I guess like also, as I was saying earlier, maybe trying to invest spaces that aren't necessarily dedicated to that, you know, like trying to go into spaces even when it feels a little bit of uncomfortable, you know, like going in places where people might not, you know, agree with you, like they'll say problematic things, and you have to be equipped, because, you know, like even for me, like when I talk about the things I talk about in my videos or in the book, I guess it won't be as bad, but like with videos, for example, like you get that constant backlash of like people saying, oh, you know, the threats, death threats, or whatever. It's just like awful. So, but again, like I need to say it, and it's important to stay strong in those instances, because like you have to go and convince people. So yeah, but it's a tricky situation, really. Yeah.
If I can add a little bit, I know there's another question. Don't worry, I haven't forgot about
Yeah.
you. There's something also around the kind of like radical hope movements and whatnot, and this whole sense of really trying to get strong images and examples of what good could look like on the left, and as opposed to, we need to criticize and we need to show why things are wrong and so on and so forth. I think that's important for change, but arguably even more important for change is being able to have the imagination and the hope to be able to build something different. There's a book that I love called Economic Science Fictions, for instance, which is like a collection of people writing, like, instead of science fiction, it's like economic fiction. But I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about different kinds of systems, right? As opposed to, going to the sort of historical academic models that we know of and analyzing them, rather trying to put them in different contexts. For me, that's what I tend to turn to when I'm exhausted anyway. Yes, thank you for being patient.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to ask, I'm also, the context of this is I have a 21-year-old model as a sister, so I've got very interesting snippets of insights to some of these things. And some of the ideas you're talking about this kind of that girl and the self-careness and whatever. And it's quite easy to see them as being quite cultish, but I suppose to be cultish or to, it would mean to have a leader. And it seems like a lot of these rules are very arbitrary and very sort of self-imposed. And I kind of wonder what you think about understanding these ideas and these kind of almost like mini trends as being cultish, and if they do have leaders, or if they're kind of self-imposed or peer imposed.
To be fair, like when you think about trends like that girl, all those trends, like self-helpy trends, you always have this figure of like the online, the guru, the guy who's gonna, the guy or the woman. It's actually interesting because when I started writing about it, I immediately used the masculine for guru, but no, you do have a few female gurus as well. It's interesting because we were talking about like how to build communities and like how to, because like conservatives find it quite easy because they'll use like religion, they'll use the sort of ideas to connect people, and like what is the role of those? Is there a role for like the sort of culture? But again, like it's a very nuanced conversation to have, like, because you don't want to fall into like we need like a sort of spiritual leader and can we? It's a real question there. Like, can we build a movement with no leaders? And our culture is like so focused on like whether we talk about history, we have to make portraits about like great figures, and even on the left, like we love to do that as well, like portraits of left-wing figures, etc. But like it's never really about like one person. But at the same time, like people are so drawn to it. So like, how do you balance that? Like, how do you create movements that are not like guided by one single person, but that are guided by values? Can it work? Do we need that sort of? I've heard that, like, because obviously collapse feminism, collapsology is like a field of study that is growing, very connected to religion, actually, spirituality as well, because of this idea of we're gonna go through collapse thanks to like a spiritual leader, and this, it's coming back quite strongly, really, like this idea of someone is gonna lead us through this. And even on the left, like people who kind of align themselves with this collapse narrative also put forward like we actually need a leader. We need a sort of spiritual voice that is not. And even Simone Weil, for those of you who read her, like she also mentioned this, not a god, but like something, like something that will dictate, that will encourage us to adopt certain values. I don't have a clear answer to that, but I think like it's an interesting question to ask ourselves.
I was just thinking while you were asking your question and while you were talking there about this idea of a leader or someone that you look to. And when I think about myself, I definitely succumb to the idea of trying to make myself better. Like I'm very not accepting of it, but I'm aware of it. And for me, it's always a vision of a better version of myself that's the role model that I look to. Like I've got a very clear vision of like a future Gemma. And where does that come from? Well, I mean, we could be like, oh, neoliberalism or capitalism or our productivity obsessed society and so on and so forth. But in some ways, that's what's so powerful, right? Is because we're trying to see ourselves and I think that's quite common for a lot of people that fall into these traps, right? It's a sense of a better me as opposed to I want to be like them. The them is you, right? And then you can also justify it by being like, I'm not looking to a person, it's just me. But that's why I think your call for imagination is so key, but then is also so tricky, because you're really having to like disrupt some real central tenets of your idea of identity or your idea of what life is meant to be like in order to try and get out of that. If anyone knows how to do it, tell me, because I'm still always trying to do that. You know, I'm a slave to productivity for sure. You want to say something?
No, it's just like, it's interesting because like, I think something we definitely need to do is also like reappropriate some of the values that have been associated with, again, like neoliberalism, like the idea of like, and that's something I touch on the book, and I'm really, like, that's something I'm probably gonna develop in the future, because I feel like it's an important topic. Like, how do we reappropriate self-care, self-help, the idea of, because I'm not gonna lie, like I come from the French Flanders, so that's the countryside, and like most people vote conservative. There is this idea of social mobility. My parents were, let's say, lower middle class, so it was very important for me to be socially mobile, and I fell into those self-help stuff. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna make money doing this, or I'm gonna do this degree so that I can do this and that, and so I was kind of obsessed with self-help. I read a lot of self-help, but when I started to, like reconnect with my left-wing values and go to humanities degrees, I got brainwashed. I'm joking, but for me, like self-help it was still self-help for me, because I was learning about how to be a better human being, but not just for me, but also for others. And that is the origin of self-help. Self-help, knowing yourself, know yourself, like the saying, know yourself. The idea was to better understand who you are so that you can be a better person for others. You can be a better citizen. And we completely lost that. And it's such a shame, because like, of course we can, it's a good thing actually to want to improve yourself and to be a better human being, because that means you're gonna be a better friend, a better partner, a better citizen. That's really the idea I want to get across in this in the section in which I talk about it. So there really is a work to do, and same with self-care. Like, we really need to reappropriate this notion. Self-care was born out of a desire to, I worked on the Black Panthers, for example, like in the US, and self-care was such a central notion for them, because it was about forging strong bodies that would be ready for the revolution, a potential revolution. So they had their own free health clinics. They would not only treat patients, but also teach them how to self-diagnose. And that's another aspect that that was, I can't remember, but anyway, this, Michelle, it's the idea of like a self-diagnosis as something that is, we only see it as something that is, bad, it's like a product of neoliberalism, but it can actually be good. And like the history of self-diagnosis is a history of reclaiming power over your body. So we have to do all that work, like the sort of reclamation work, and like reappropriating those values, and show that truly they are left-wing, they are progressive.
Love that. We probably have time for a sneaky final question, if anyone has one. Yes, fast hand.
So earlier we were talking about how the right tends to dominate the conversation, particularly online, largely because it's like based around outrage culture. You kind of need the most angry headline to get a foot in the door. And I'm wondering whether you think there is a way in which the left can take control of the conversation without just resorting to demagoguery, or whether there's a way for maybe a more healthy kind of demagoguery. Because I often find when, particularly with populist movements, when it's just generalized anger, it can often ends up becoming reactionary, even if it's started in a left-wing place. But I also struggle with it because I do think the way the left is going to become more prominent is by being more angry, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, two things comes to mind. The first one, like for emotions, for example, it's a bit of a struggle because of course, like this collapsed feminism, the idea of anger, women in anger, women being angry is kind of looked down upon. Like as a woman, you are supposed to be nice and calm and favor dialogue and understanding and things like that. And like I've seen a book as well, like on Uncontrollable Women or something like that. You know, reclaiming those emotions as well as uplifting people, being angry is okay, being frustrated is okay, using vulgar language can be okay too. You know, like we've lost it. We fell so much for the respectability politics, even on the left, when you see it like in debates, etc. But I wish we saw more, just like people just being angry and like not necessarily like analyzing things with like this concept or that concept, but just saying like, this is not fair. This is just not fair. I'm frustrated or blah, 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 or use like other words, you do you. But some politicians do that. Most of them are men because like it's, you know, when you're a woman and you get angry on TV, it's not looked at the same way as men. So I guess there would be that aspect. And then, like the sort of the left, like how can we kind of counter the fact that the right uses the algorithm and attention economy to its advantage. I remember I had an interview with someone who was actually looking into ways as to how we can counter that. And the conclusion was always the same. It's like, as long as it's going to be profit motivated, it's going to be a bit of a struggle. So as long as we work with platforms that are privatized, and that's why I'm talking in the conclusion about this idea of deprivatization, as long as we work with that, it's going to be difficult, because it's not just about the ideas, it's also about like this profit incentives. And as I was saying earlier, some people will say stuff that I'm not even sure they believe, or like they wouldn't say it like in such a harsh way, but they know it's going to get clicks, they know they're going to make money out of it. And so, you know, like if we remove the profit incentive, a lot of that clickbait, outrageous content would not exist. So, yeah.
On that note, not so outrageous content, I don't think. Brilliant content today from Alice, and I hope you'll join me in giving her a huge round of applause to say thank you for coming and sharing her thoughts with you all. Now, please go buy books before. There's another session after this one?
There is another session, and we've got a signing table as well. So if you want your book signed, and you can ask the questions from Alice that you didn't get a chance to ask.
Thank you very much.
Alice, well done. That was great.